something that's, kind of bitchy.
Pretty bitchy.
Bitchy? I know.
It's just, bitchy.
Well, first of all, you're a little bitchy. That's next level bitchy.
Welcome to Bitchy History, the irreverent history podcast where one history professor gets to bitch about history and the impact it has on the world today.
Well, everybody, welcome to 2025. It's gonna suck. Anyway, I hope you all had a great holiday season, or at least had one with minimal interaction with your insane MAGA relatives. On that note, you guys know that you aren't actually required to spend holidays with them, right? I spent Christmas in a food coma, watching Die Hard, Die Hard 2, and that one episode of Star Trek The Next Generation where Picard does Die Hard on the Enterprise. There was a theme. But most importantly, there was absolutely no Trump supporters anywhere near me the entire time, and it was glorious. But before we get into today's episode, I would like to remind you that my lecture series on Star Trek and American history will be starting up soon. To get access, you'll need to be a paid subscriber on bitchyhistory.com. It's only $5 a month. It's less than anything at Starbucks. I promise you won't regret subscribing. Not only will you get access to the lecture series that's upcoming, you'll get access to future lecture series that I am planning, and these will include live Zoom calls and Q&A. And also, you will get access to recordings of the lectures. You'll also get access to subscriber-exclusive articles like the series that I am currently putting out on the history of women's anthems in music. Now, on to today's podcast, which is both timely and frustrating as hell. Why the hell can't the United States elect a woman as president? Let's get one thing straight. The United States loves to brand itself as the global leader in democracy, land of the free, home of the brave, right? But here's the thing. While other countries are out there electing females left and right, we're still stuck debating whether a woman can be likable enough to sit in the Oval Office. And frankly, it's embarrassing. And don't get me started on the double standards. Male candidates can scream into a microphone, wave their fists, mock people openly, and we'll call it charisma. But if a woman does it, she's shrill or too emotional. Meanwhile, countries like Iceland, Sri Lanka, and New Zealand have figured out that women can lead without the sky falling. So what's our excuse? Today, we are pulling back the curtain on the women who have dared to put their names on the ballot in the United States. From Victoria Woodhull's audacious run in 1872 to Kamala Harris's historic vice presidency and 2024 presidential bid, these women have faced every roadblock you can imagine and then some. We'll also take a brief global detour to countries that have shattered the glass ceiling sometimes decades ago. Angela Merkel ran Germany like a boss for 16 years. Jacinda Ardern passed gun reforms. And here we are, still stuck in but can she handle the nuclear codes if she has a period phase? Please. Here's the thing. Representation isn't just about symbolism. It's about power. When women lead, they bring different perspectives and priorities to the table. Studies show that countries with women in leadership often have stronger healthcare systems, more equitable policies, and, shockingly, fewer wars. But here in the U.S., we can't seem to get the idea that women belong in the Oval Office through to people just as much as they belong in any other career. It's not for lack of trying. Women have been running for president since the 19th century, before women even had the right to vote in the United States. The problem is the system, the culture, and yeah, that's all pretty much set up on patriarchy. Let's take it back to the 19th century to start out. Picture this. Women couldn't vote, they couldn't own property in many states, and were often considered the property of their husbands, in fact. So naturally, some absolute legends of women decided, hey, you know what we should do? We should run for president. And that's exactly what they did. We'll start out with Victoria Woodhull, a woman with no time for society's rules. Born in 1838 to a family of, shall we say, questionable moral character at the time, think traveling spiritualists who ran grifts on the side. Victoria took those survival skills and turned them into a Wall Street empire. That's right, she was the first woman to own a brokerage firm. Eat your heart out, Wolf of Wall Street. In 1872, she decided to run for president under the Equal Rights Party platform. Her campaign called for women's suffrage, obviously, an 8-hour workday, and free love, which wasn't as scandalous as it sounds. It was about women making their own choices, like having the right to divorce. Naturally, this terrified men everywhere. And just to make things more dramatic, Woodhull's campaign got derailed when she was arrested for publishing a scandalous article about a preacher's affair, because apparently the real crime wasn't the affair, it was a woman choosing to expose it. Victoria didn't win, but she put the idea of women in politics on the map, and for that, we love her. Next up is Belva Ann Lockwood, a woman who said, if the system won't let me in, I'll rewrite the rules. Born in 1830, Lockwood became the first woman admitted to the bar in Washington, D.C., and later the first woman to argue a case before the Supreme Court. Oh, and she had to draft the law that made that possible, by the way. Lockwood ran for president twice, in 1884 and 1888, under the Equal Rights Party. Her platform included peace, equality, and what we would now call intersectional feminism. When people mocked her campaign, she famously said, "I cannot vote, but I can be voted for." Honestly, that could have been put on a t-shirt. Obviously, she didn't win either time that she ran, but she inspired a generation of women to push boundaries and prove that running for office wasn't just for the boys' club. It wasn't until 1964 that we got another noteworthy attempt at a woman running for president, and that would be Margaret Chase Smith, a Republican senator who was the first woman to serve in both the House and the Senate. And trust me, she didn't just sit in those rooms, she owned them. Smith became famous for her Declaration of Conscience speech during the McCarthy era, where she called out her party for enabling fear-mongering. In 1964, she decided to run for president. She didn't win the nomination, but she became the first woman to have her name placed in the nomination by a major party. And that's not nothing. Smith showed that a woman could be taken seriously on the national stage, even if she was surrounded by men who still thought that a woman president was an impossibility. And then there's Shirley Chisholm, who came onto the scene in 1972 and said, "I'm not going to wait for permission to run for office." Chisholm was the first black woman elected to Congress in 1968, and 4 years later, she became the first black woman to run for president under a major party. Her slogan, "Unbought and Unbossed," wasn't just catchy, it was her entire ethos. She ran on a platform of equity and justice, calling for systemic change long before it was trendy. Her campaign was anything but easy. She faced racism and sexism from all sides, including her own party. And while she didn't win, she secured 151 delegate votes at the Democratic National Convention. Not bad for someone the establishment tried to ignore. Chisholm's candidacy wasn't just about breaking barriers, it was about smashing them into a million pieces. She paved the way for women of color in politics, showing the world that "wait your turn" is not a phrase that women are interested in following. So, what did all these trailblazers have in common? Aside from being absolute icons, they all showed up in spaces where they weren't invited and they refused to leave. They proved that women belonged in politics long before society was ready to admit it. But running for office wasn't easy for these women. They faced ridicule, legal barriers, and outright hostility, and yet they kept going. If that's not inspiring, I don't know what is. So now let's fast forward to the modern era, where women are no longer just breaking barriers, they are smashing them with baseball bats, and it's making men very uncomfortable. The fight for the presidency hasn't gotten any easier. Sure, female candidates are more visible than ever, but their challenges have only evolved into more insidious forms. Let's talk about the game changers of the 1980s and beyond. We'll start with Geraldine Ferrero, the first woman to be nominated for vice president by a major party. In 1984, Walter Mondale made the bold, some might say revolutionary choice to pick Ferrero as his running mate. And for a brief moment, it felt like progress. But of course, the media had to media. Ferrero was grilled about her husband's finances and treated like a novelty act rather than a serious contender. Ferrero and Mondale lost in a landslide, but Ferrero's nomination shattered a major glass ceiling. She paved the way for a future woman to be considered not just for the second spot, but the top spot itself. And then we get to Hillary Clinton. Love her, hate her, or feel meh about her, I usually fall into the third category, there's no denying that she's a pivotal figure in the history of women in politics. Clinton's first presidential shot came in 2008 when she ran a fierce primary campaign against then-Senator Barack Obama. She didn't win, but she came damn close. And then came 2016. Clinton made history as the first woman to secure a major party's presidential nomination. Her campaign slogan was "Stronger Together," and it spoke to unity and progress. But of course, the 2016 election became anything but that. Instead of debating her policies, we were stuck talking about her emails, her pantsuits, and whether she smiled enough, because apparently that's what leadership is about. And let's not forget, Clinton won the popular vote by nearly 3 million votes, but thanks to the Electoral College, a system that serves a legitimate purpose but also has legitimate reasons for critique and change, she lost the presidency. And just like that, the glass ceiling reinforced itself. Clinton's loss was a gut punch, no question, but her campaign showed that a woman could go toe-to-toe with the political boys' club and come out swinging. Her candidacy inspired countless women to step up, even if the system wasn't ready for her. And of course, we can't talk about modern women in politics without at least mentioning Elizabeth Warren. In 2020, the Massachusetts senator ran one of the most detailed, policy-heavy campaigns in recent memory. Warren's platform included plans for everything: healthcare, education, childcare, you name it, she had a plan. But instead of focusing on her policies, surprise, surprise, the media latched onto her tone. She was called angry and shrill, as if women are supposed to whisper about fixing a broken system instead of scream. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders was out there yelling at rallies and being called passionate. I can see the double standard, can you? Of course, Warren didn't win the nomination, but her campaign slogan, Persist, became a rallying cry for women everywhere. And let's be honest, it's a perfect summary of what women in politics have to do just to survive. Though I do admit that I have a certain Virgo fondness for her unofficial slogan. I have a plan for that. And then, of course, we come to a recent loss that really still stings. Kamala Harris, the woman who broke through one of the biggest barriers in American politics for women. In 2020, Harris became the first woman of color to be elected vice president. Harris's political rise is nothing short of historic. Before becoming VP, she served as California's Attorney General and then as a U.S. Senator, where she made a name for herself grilling witnesses during hearings like it was her full-time job. Well, because it kind of was, at least it had been her former full-time job. She was one of the most qualified, if not the most qualified candidate we've seen for the presidency, male or female. When President Biden announced he would no longer be running for re-election in 2024, Harris launched her own campaign for the presidency. It was a historic moment in American history, and considering that she only had about 3 months to actually campaign, she did a hell of a job. However, her campaign has served as a reminder of how far we still have to go in America. The media spent more time dissecting her likability than they did on the obvious sundowning of a felon with 34 convictions. Do I sound bitter? Yeah, I probably do, and that's because I am, and I bet if you are listening to this podcast, you are too. So what do all of these modern contenders teach us? First, that women have more than proven they can run for president. Second, that the barriers they face, media bias, fundraising challenges, institutional sexism, and racism, haven't gone anywhere. But third, and most importantly, that we're not backing down. Now, let's step out of the United States for a minute and take a look at the rest of the world, because they're not waiting to figure out if a woman can lead. While the U.S. has been dragging its feet for 250 years, countries like Sri Lanka, Germany, and New Zealand have been electing women who have not only led, but thrived. So let's talk about these global trailblazers and what they've accomplished while we've been debating likability. Our journey starts in Sri Lanka, where Sirimova Bandaranaike, I am definitely slaughtering that last name, I apologize, became the world's first female prime minister in 1960. Yes, you heard that right. The very first. Sirimova stepped into politics after her husband, the sitting prime minister, was assassinated. While some called her a symbolic widow, she quickly showed that she was anything but. She focused on socialist policies, nationalized key industries, and aligned Sri Lanka with non-aligned nations during the Cold War. And let's be real, running a country while navigating the geopolitics of the 1960s was no small feat. Next, we've got Indira Gandhi, who became India's first female prime minister in 1966. Known as the Iron Lady of India, Gandhi centralized power, navigated wars, and launched major agricultural reforms that transformed India's economy. Sure, she declared a controversial state of emergency in the 1970s, but hey, show me a male leader who hasn't overreached at least once. Oh, wait. Gandhi wasn't just a leader, she was a force of nature. Her legacy is complicated, but there's no denying that she set the bar for what women could achieve in global politics. Then there's Golda Meir, Israel's first, and so far only, female prime minister. Known for her no-nonsense style, Meir led the country through the Yom Kippur War and managed some of the most challenging crises in Israel's history. She once said, "Whether women are better than men, I cannot say, but I can say they are certainly no worse." Now, however you might feel about Israel, that sounds about right for women and men. And now we move on to the 21st century, where women are taking the reins politically in more and more countries. As I mentioned earlier in the episode, Angela Merkel, often called the world's most powerful woman, served as Germany's chancellor for 16 years. Merkel didn't just lead Germany, she practically ran the EU. Okay, the EU over in Brussels might disagree with that, but they'll get over it. Her steady, pragmatic leadership got Germany through the Eurozone crisis, and her science background gave her a no-nonsense approach to policymaking. Was she flashy? Absolutely not. Did she care? Also, no. Merkel showed that leadership isn't actually about charisma, it's about results, and she delivered. And then in New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern became the youngest female leader in the world when she was elected Prime Minister of New Zealand in 2017. After the Christchurch mosque shootings in 2019, she showed what compassion and decisive action looked like, banning assault weapons in record time. Meanwhile, in the US, we can't even agree that gun violence is a problem, even when it's the #1 cause of death for children. We're too busy worrying about Drag Queen Story Hour. Ardern also navigated COVID-19 with empathy and transparency, making New Zealand one of the safest places during the pandemic. And sure, you could argue that they are a remote island country, which probably helped a little bit. But you know what? She still did the work. She proved that strong leadership and kindness aren't mutually exclusive, they're complementary. And then, of course, there's Claudia Sheinbaum, who became Mexico's first female president in 2024. God, why couldn't we be more like Mexico? Which is not a sentence I say very often. Sheinbaum, a scientist by training and former mayor of Mexico City, has broken through the machismo culture that's dominated Mexican politics for decades. Her election is a testament to women's progress in Latin America and a reminder that the U.S. is still playing catch-up. So here's the burning question. Why are some countries electing women to lead while the U.S. has a record-breaking 0 female presidents? Women only hold 28% of congressional seats in this country, while we make up over 50% of the population. Turns out, a lot of it comes down to the systems we have in place. Other countries have embraced systemic changes like gender quotas and party reforms to get women into positions of power. Let's take a world tour and see how they've done it. In South Asia, they have produced some of the most iconic female leaders, from Indira Gandhi in India to Benazir Bhutto in Pakistan. And before you ask, no, they didn't rise to power because the region is particularly progressive about gender equality. Quite the opposite. Here's how it works. Dynastic politics have often paved the way in these nations. After the deaths of male relatives, women like Gandhi and Bhutto stepped into leadership roles, sometimes as placeholders. But let's be real, these women were far more than just placeholders. For instance, Benazir Bhutto was the first woman to lead a Muslim-majority country. Her rise to power wasn't easy. She faced constant opposition, including imprisonment and exile. But she became a symbol of resilience and progress in a region where women's leadership is often seen as revolutionary. So is dynastic politics an ideal pathway to leadership? No, absolutely not. But it's opened doors in regions where those doors were otherwise sealed shut. And once those women got through, they didn't just sit in the corner, they led. Then we can hop over to Europe, where parliamentary systems have been a game changer for women in politics. Unlike the US, where candidates have to campaign like they're auditioning for reality TV, and we see how that works out for us, parliamentary leaders are chosen by their parties. This allows women to rise through the ranks without the same level of public scrutiny that plagues US presidential campaigns. The parliamentary model reduces some of the hyper-masculine posturing that dominates US presidential campaigning. It's not perfect, but it has given Europe a head start in breaking the political glass ceiling for women. And then we come to Africa, where gender quotas have been a game changer for women in many African nations. Rwanda, for instance, is leading the charge with women holding over 60% of parliamentary seats. Yes, 60%. Let that sink in. After the 1994 genocide, Rwanda rebuilt its political system with women at its center. The government introduced a constitutional quota requiring that at least 30% of parliamentary seats be held by women, and the results have far exceeded expectations. Today, women are driving policy on healthcare, education, and economic reform. Then in South Africa, they have also embraced gender quotas, with women holding about 46% of parliamentary seats. Political parties like the African National Congress have adopted internal quotas as well, ensuring that women are represented at every level of decision-making. In Liberia, we have seen Africa's first elected female head of state with Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. As Liberia's president from 2006 to 2018, she led the country through post-Civil War recovery, proving that women can lead even in the most challenging of circumstances. Gender quotas aren't about lowering standards, no matter what anybody says about DEI. They're about leveling the playing field in systems that have historically excluded women, and evidence shows that they work. So what can the U.S. take away from all of this? For starters, other countries didn't wait for cultural attitudes to evolve. They implemented systemic change, gender quotas, party reforms, and better support for female candidates. The results? More women in leadership faster. Second, these leaders have shown there's no one-size-fits-all approach to leadership. Whether it's Merkel's pragmatism, Ardern's empathy, Sheinbaum's scientific precision, or Rwanda's policy-driven focus, women bring diverse skills and perspectives to the table. Maybe it's time we embrace that. And finally, let's stop pretending the US is the best democracy in the world when we're lagging behind so many countries in gender equity. If Rwanda can achieve majority female representation, what's our excuse? Oh, you actually want to know what our excuse is. Okay, it's systemic sexism. That's not exactly a surprise. Our political system, our media, our culture are basically designed to keep women out of the Oval Office. So let's unpack this dumpster fire, shall we? One of the first major issues to look at is the blatantly and infuriating sexism of the media. If you're a woman running for president, get ready to have your wardrobe, voice, and facial expressions analyzed more than your actual policies. Welcome to the likability trap, where women are expected to be strong, but not cold, confident, but not arrogant, and warm, but not weak. It's exhausting just thinking about it. Let's take Hillary Clinton as Exhibit A. In 2016, she faced endless criticism for being unrelatable, but Donald Trump, a man who literally lives in a golden tower, was somehow considered authentic. Make that make sense. These challenges multiply for women of color. Shirley Chisholm faced it in 1972. Kamala Harris faced it in 2024. The racism and sexism they encounter are intertwined, creating a double whammy of bias that's very hard to overcome. When Harris became vice president, the backlash wasn't just about her politics, it was about her identity. She's Black, South Asian, and a woman, which apparently makes some people very uncomfortable. But Harris wasn't there to make people comfortable. She was there to lead. That was what mattered. America also has an obsession with strongman leaders, the kind of guys who pound their fists, shout a lot, and pretend they're running the Roman Empire instead of a democracy. It's no wonder women struggle to fit into this outdated archetype. Leadership isn't about brute strength, it's about strategy, empathy, and results. But try telling that to a country that still fetishizes masculinity in politics. And here's the kicker. Women are often labeled unelectable simply because they're women. Never mind that women are winning at every other level of government, governors, senators, mayors, you name it. But when it comes to the presidency, we act like it's an impossible leap. This myth persists because people, even women, internalize the idea that men are more natural leaders. Spoiler alert, they're not. Women have been leading families, communities, and revolutions for centuries. It's about time we acknowledged it. And let's not let the political parties off the hook. Both Democrats and Republicans have a history of gatekeeping when it comes to women candidates. Sure, they love to parade women out for photo ops, but when it's time to pick a nominee, they're suddenly very concerned about electability. Now let's take a second to talk about what happens when women lead. Not that we should have to. Men have had the opportunity to lead, and it shouldn't be up to women to prove they'll be better than men to get that chance. But in point of fact, they are. Studies show that countries with more women in leadership tend to prioritize healthcare, education, and family-friendly policies. During the COVID-19 pandemic, women-led countries like New Zealand and Germany had some of the best outcomes. Why? Because empathy and long-term thinking are apparently female superpowers. And here's a fun fact. Female leaders are also less likely to start wars. Shocking, I know. While male leaders are out there flexing their machismo, women are more often focused on diplomacy and conflict resolution. Maybe, just maybe, we need more of that. Because it turns out that women run a pretty tight ship overall, whether that's prime minister or president or a city council. In 1888, a small Kansas town became the first in America to have the first all-woman municipal government. Mary D. Lohman was a widowed dressmaker who somehow found herself running for mayor of Oskaloosa in 1888. Her candidacy wasn't part of a grand feminist movement or a coordinated political effort. No. Her name was put forward as a joke by a group of men who thought it would be hilarious to nominate a woman. Surprise, the joke backfired when Lohman actually won the election. So what did Lohman do with her unexpected role as mayor? For starters, she took the job pretty seriously. The men might have nominated her as a joke, but Lohman understood the importance of governance. She oversaw the management of public works, handled town finances, and navigated the complexities of small-town politics, all while running her dressmaking business on the side. However, it wasn't just her running things. A year before, the city had elected the first all-female city council. Once in office, this all-woman leadership team rolled up their sleeves and got to work. They managed the city's finances, addressed major infrastructure issues, and ensured that Oskaloosa ran smoothly. Remember, this was 1888. There were no fancy management tools, no staff to handle the paperwork, and definitely no how to govern a city TikTok tutorial. These women were navigating completely uncharted territory for them. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about Oskaloosa's all-woman government. Many men were skeptical, assuming that women would fail and prove that politics was a man's job. A newspaper suggested that a petticoatocracy was quarreling over whether the city flag should be shirred, cut bias, or trimmed with lace. The Topeka Journal retaliated. Some sour fellows are ridiculing the Oskaloosa city government. It makes them mad to see a woman do anything but fry beefsteak. It turned out the women were actually pretty good at their jobs. One of their notable achievements was maintaining fiscal discipline. Unlike their male predecessors who often ran up large debts, the team ensured that the city's finances were in order. They tackled public works projects, improved roads and sanitation. Basically, they did what needed to be done without all of the theatrics that came when men were in charge. As the 1889 election approached, Oskaloosa's experiment with an all-woman government became a heated topic of debate. Supporters pointed to the city council's accomplishments. They had inherited a depleted treasury, poorly maintained streets, and crumbling sidewalks, yet they had managed to deliver substantial improvements and still end the year with a surplus. The McLuth Times summarized the sentiments of many of their admirers. The woman's government took hold of Oskaloosa with a depleted treasury and lots of poor streets, but during the year they have made many needed improvements and have over $100 in the treasury. It would only be justice to give them another term at the helm. They got a second term, because women, when given the chance to lead, do it right. So what's next? The future is shaped by voters. Younger generations are more diverse, more progressive, less tied to traditional gender roles. As millennials and Gen Z become the dominant voting blocs, the idea of a woman president in our country will seem less radical and more inevitable. When the U.S. finally elects a woman president, it won't just be a victory for her. It'll be a victory for all the women who came before her. From Victoria Woodhull to Kamala Harris, every campaign has brought us closer to that moment. But electing a woman as president isn't the end game. It's the beginning of a new chapter where leadership in America is defined by competence, empathy, and vision, not gender. The fight for a female president has been long and messy, but progress is happening. The glass ceiling isn't unbreakable, it's just very stubborn. And when it finally shatters, we'll be here to celebrate. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Bitchy History. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight. And remember, the future is female, but so is the past.
Thank you for tuning in to hear me bitch about history. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe and make sure to visit bitchyhistory.com to sign up for the newsletter. The newsletter offers extra resources on the topics covered in all of our episodes, as well as on the topics covered in my videos on TikTok. Supporting the podcast is really easy. Spread the word to your friends, grab some fabulous Bitchy History merch off our website, or consider becoming a paid subscriber. Your support means the world to us.
History. 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 History.
History.
What a bitch, right?